Welcome to the Divine Detour podcast. Today's episode on the Divine Purpose series is sponsored by Rebecca Dahan in memory of her father, Michal ben Kasriel David. May his neshama have a beautiful aliyah. If you'd like to sponsor or co-sponsor an episode, please reach out to me on Instagram or in the show notes. Thank you so much. Hi friends, this is your Divine Detour host, Ora Rosenblatt, and I'm really excited to share with you. I am running a group called The Artist's Way Forward. It is a 13-week process where we go through Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, which is a phenomenal book. And we're doing it alongside the Omer, which is what I did last year with a friend that totally transformed me. And this is my second cohort. I have some beautiful testimonials from my first group of ladies that you can find on my Instagram page. We are starting this process on April 21st after Pesach. It will be alongside the Omer, so we'll be doing a spiritual recovery alongside self-refinement. It is really spectacular. It has moved so many people. It has changed me personally, and I'd be honored if you join me. So please reach out or please check the show notes for links or Instagram. I'm looking forward to guiding you through this process. Now stay tuned for the Divine Purpose podcast with Tonia from Human and Holy. Hi, Tonia. This is so exciting.
So much fun. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Tonia from Human and Holy. I'm so excited to have you on the Divine Purpose podcast.
So glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I think I'm excited for this conversation, and I know you're quite the interviewer. And have you even been on another podcast?
I have been.
Okay.
Not so many, but
not so many. I haven't heard you, and I know most of my followers probably haven't heard your story, and I'm excited to introduce you to some of them as well. And I couldn't think of a better person to have this topic of conversation with other than you.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, and I have to bring in my dad because he showed up today really strong. So my recordings don't go out like the same week. I'm not on top of it as much. But today is Chaf Aleph Adar. And in today's Tanya, as you guys know, this podcast is called Divine Purpose. And in today's Tanya, it said the word purpose so many times, and I sent it to Tanya this morning. I was like, oh my God, look at this. And then of course she responded with my dad's line. I love when that happens because Bashar and synchronicity is everywhere. And it's so exciting. And it actually changed the trajectory of what I wanted to talk to you about. So we're staying with Divine Purpose, and we're going to get to that soon. But I'd love to get a little background on you for anyone who doesn't really know you.
Sure.
So just a little bit personal story. Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about how your podcast got started and how it makes you feel. Everything you want to share.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to be here with you. I always love connecting with you and talking, so I'm excited to just talk with you.
Awesome.
A little bit about me. I grew up in Houston, Texas on Shulchas. My parents have a Chabad center there, which is pretty unique because it's a hospitality home and it's an upbringing I'm really grateful for. So just being brought up by parents who were in a position of giving and getting to participate in that from a very young age was a really formative experience for me, and also really shaped my understanding of my purpose, our purpose as people in this world, and how much we each have to offer to the world and how much we could be of service to other people. I started the podcast, I want to say it was almost 6 years ago. I was a new mother, and I've always been really connected to studying Torah and Chassidus, and I'm an artist, and I had just wrapped a project for probably 3 years of writing daily poems and summaries based on the Tanya of the day, and then I added illustrations to it.
Oh my God.
And I was really desiring a place to explore the themes of Torah and Chassidus in a really grounded, raw, human way. I think new motherhood really threw me into a new experience of myself, my humanity, confronting myself in new ways, and I just wanted honest language around spiritual ideas that felt like it really hit my personal experience of everyday life. And then also just seeing so many women around me who had so much to offer in this realm and who seemed to have this natural synthesis of Torah study and real life and honesty and just showing up as they were. And Hindle, your
I
sister, was
remember.
one of my first guests. And she's a perfect example of that. And she's an icon. I love her.
Yeah.
And just so many women like that. And so I just dove into it. It was very much just following this gut feeling, this desire. I don't know why I was so devoted to it at the time, but I just felt, oh, I want to do this. And I remember someone asking me, like, are you good at interviewing? Do you know if you're good at this? And I'm just like, no, I'm just doing this. I'm feeling it. I was feeling it and I did it. And years later, obviously, it's developed and evolved in so many different ways, but I still feel very connected to that core of bringing Judaism, Torah, Hasidus to life in ways that really reflect and echo the honest experience of each person's humanity, life. And I don't believe that the principles of the teachings of Torah or Hasidus are separate from our lives. I think that they lift our lives in a very practical, tangible, felt way. And so that's my project. And yeah, what I
Yeah,
love to do.
it's amazing. Anyone who hasn't listened, although I'm sure there's very few of you out there who are listening to this who hasn't listened to Tonia's podcast. First of all, you're a phenomenal interviewer. That's number one, which is really important because there's many podcasts of people I like who are on it and I just can't listen because the interviewers are not that good. So that's a really big blessing that you're able to interview in such a beautiful way. And what I love about it is that there's so many different people who are on it, different women. And it's exactly what you said. They all give such tangible advice of how to incorporate Torah and Hasidus into everyday life and different areas of life. I particularly like the ones that you do on relationship and Nida. There's been some really amazing women who've gone on that. And so something that you said that I want to like delve into a little bit. You said you had this desire and you're not really sure where it came from. And I find that people get to a place in life and they understand that the world is created for God to dwell in and to lift it up. And they're not sure where they're supposed to head. And so the idea of this podcast is to really help people figure out like, what is your divine purpose? And so this idea of you had this desire, I assume you've had many ideas and desire. Why did you follow this one?
First of all, I love your mission statement. I do think that so many of us are trying to figure out what our divine purpose is. And it doesn't come as like a flash of lightning or a really clear sense of what we're supposed to do. I think that the clarity generally comes in hindsight. Although I will say that yes, I've had many desires, but I've had a few desires that hit me in such an intense way that it felt like I'm being completely summoned to this task. And it just, without needing to consult anyone or check if it was a good idea, it just felt, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do, and I have no proof of it. But there have been a couple junctures in my life where I've experienced that, this just full body, yes, being hit with a concept that I know I need to bring to life, like it's mine, and it's been placed in my lap. And I think part of that is also clearing space through not doing a lot of the things that are middle priorities. I read that concept in Oliver Berkman's book, 10,000 Weeks. And years ago, maybe 7 years ago, it was one of
What
those ideas that changed my life.
what
Yeah.
would mid priorities be? What's an example of that?
So he talks about this concept that most of us destroy our lives on those middling priorities, where the low priority things we all know are not important, but it's the things that we want to do, but maybe we don't want to do with the one life that we have. And he says the mediocre relationships or the mediocre job opportunities or the mediocre purpose that doesn't fully light you up, those are the things that prevent us from having space for the things that we're like, oh, full of body, yes. And I think that part of making space in our lives for that full body yes is definitely saying no to things that don't light us up in that way and that don't. This week's Parsha, by the way, talks about this, where everyone is contributing to the Mishkan, and
Yeah.
the verses that are used literally talk about people's spirits being lit up by certain contributions that they wanted to bring, people bringing what they are naturally good at, and genuinely each having their own talent, ability, skill, hobby, and then offering that to the Mishkan. And the Mishkan is literally a dwelling place for God. When you talk about divine
Right.
purpose, making this world a home for God, that how does that happen? And I think you see it literally in the verses of the Torah, which is every person bringing what they have. So we do not do the world a service when we bring something that we think we should bring or that we should be good at,
Mm.
that we don't have. When we bring what we have, what lights up our hearts, the actual wording of the pasuk is uses words like lave and ruchai, heart and spirit, really speaking to the things that light us up in that way. And I thought that was such a gorgeous lesson actually in this week's Parsha about how we contribute to the world in bringing what we have and what excites us and what lights us up.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous because it seems like it's the blueprint to explain what you're supposed to bring,
Mm,
right? If it says it in the Torah, this is what they're bringing and it lights them up, then it's an example of what you're supposed to bring to the world because the Mishkan is the dwelling place of God, which is this world, which is ourselves. If you go deeper into Hasidus, and so if everyone brought what lights them up, then that's their service. And so
mm,
if our divine purpose is our service to the world to help God dwell in this world, then we need to bring what lights us up. And I think you said that really well, that not to get stuck. I think you being able to hear what was really important and what lit you up was because yourself and your mind and your vessel was probably not busy with the mediocre stuff. Because as you said, you've read that book. I know you're very well read, and you really take these ideas inward. And
mm,
so I think people do need to make space because what happens is you get busy with the mediocre and then you can't hear that messaging from
mm.
Hashem. You can't hear what it is that lights you up, and then you can mistake something that's not as strong for what is if it's coming at you at the same level. So I think part of it is really making that space to hear Hashem speaking through you.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I don't know if it's necessarily just through not doing. I think it's also having conscious space where you're still with yourself and open to
Yes.
that sense to come through you.
Would you do you have ideas of like how one do you meditate? Is there tangible examples of what one can do if someone is not hearing what they want to be doing?
For sure. I don't
Okay.
feel qualified ever to give anyone advice. I can say what works for me.
That's what I'm
What
looking
works,
for. Yes.
yeah, what works for me is journaling is a huge one and has been since I'm like 10 years old. I've journaled
Mm.
most of my life. And it actually started because my mother implemented it in our lives one summer. We went away for the summer, and every morning she had to sit down and journal. And if you were too young to write, you drew a picture. And so then I had this journal at the age of 8. And I just think that's an interesting piece. I think
Mm.
about that with my own kids that I wonder, she never encouraged me to journal after that, but I wonder if that sort of got me going where I had this paper and pen. And so I knew what to do with it because I
Mm.
had tried it before. And then just throughout my life, that became my biggest way of getting to know myself, how I was feeling, what was going on beneath that. Through middle school, high school, I have stacks of journals. And still today, I still come to the paper to figure out who I am, what I want, what's blocking me. I think that there's something beautifully confronting about the page, and you don't have to be a writer to journal. It's really
Right.
just an act of meeting yourself continuously until you can't look away from what because it becomes so obvious to you on the page. And another big one for me is physical movement, being in nature, walking, definitely a couple friendships where I
Mm.
feel really seen for who I am and I can share who I am and also see the other person. That's also really supportive in finding and hearing your own voice.
Yeah.
And Yeah, that's what comes to mind
Yeah,
off the
those
top
are
of my
great
head.
examples. The journal's really big as I do the
Mm.
artist way. We
Yeah, of
actually
course.
started the artist way together at some point. Do you remember
Oh
this?
no. Yes,
Quite a
I
few
do.
years ago.
We didn't get very far though.
We did not get far. I think also our
Well,
timing was really off. I don't recommend starting the artist way if you are newly pregnant or nursing a baby. I think
I
we
had a
both were
baby
on one
years
of those
pregnant.
spectrums,
Yeah, it
but
was not the time for me.
no, not the time
No.
for me either. But we got
Yeah.
back to it. And that is one of the morning pages as she shares it.
Hmm.
And it's exactly like you said, it's so incredible. I've been running these artist way groups. And I think that's what's probably the strongest for most people as far as all of it is confronting themselves on the page, of it being a space where no one else reads it. You don't even read it. So you're able to just share openly and you can finally hear what's in your heart
Mm.
and get rid of what's not good and bring in what's good and all of that. Yeah, that's a really good one. So before we dive deeper into purpose, our own purpose, I'd love you to share the original purpose, which is a lot in today's Tanya, about the world. What is the purpose of the world, right? If you were giving me an elevator pitch of what is the purpose of the world, because everything is part of Hashem. And so the world and the extension of it and all of us. And if we're all connected and we're all part of the one, right? Then if we can really understand the purpose of the world, then we can move forward and really find our own purpose.
Yeah. First of all, I love that you're asking this question. And obviously, I went into this conversation like, we're just going to flow and what's going to come through aura in this conversation, which I really love. And I love that we're starting here when we talk about purpose, because I think that when we talk about personal purpose, for me, it absolutely comes back to the creation of the
Right.
world, why human beings are here, the Torah
Yeah.
perspective on what our purpose is, and then actually clearing out the noise and practice, obviously down to the micro details of how do I get to know my own self. And obviously, I think for all of us, this is a lifelong process. There are times when we feel in real alignment, then we feel disconnected and we have to find our way back to ourselves. But all of that is the practical ways that expresses itself. But first, there's why am I even trying to
Right.
express a purpose in this world? And why do I even believe that there's one for me to uncover in my life? The world was created with God's reality exists in this entire world in a state of concealment. We don't see the oneness of the world, the oneness of our source and life force in everything. Human beings have a spark of godliness within us. In Eov, in Job, it says every person has a chelok elokah mimal, a literal piece of God. And the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, in the first Chabad Chassidic work, in chapter 2, says mamish, literally. You literally have a piece of God. And the way that I think about the human being having a piece of God within them and our relationship to revealing God in this world is that if you are literally a piece of the source, a piece of the creator, then you are essentially a walking gold detector for God in this world. And so you have an inner sensor for what is godly, what is true, what reveals its source. And it's through human beings living in alignment with this divine source that we reveal and express the divine reality of this world. I think when you meet a person who is tapped into and reflecting a divine reality internally, also seeing other people for that divine self, and then seeing the world around them as not being random and tapping into the purpose of different elements of their life, it reveals God to other people as well.
Mm.
And Avraham, what's coming to mind is Avraham, because
Okay.
Avraham would feed people that passed by, and then he would say, "Bless God." And he would help them recognize a divine creator through sharing with them, through seeing the divine reality in the world, and through encouraging others to affirm the reality of God. And I think that the work of finding our own purpose is about expressing and revealing the oneness of our creator and our own life force. And that's there's to me it's like a triple relationship. It's the relationship with myself and the divine reality internally, the relationship with the divine reality in another, and learning how to see another person as more divine, and then relationship with noticing the divine in the world. And that's a concept that really comes up in Chassidus which is Jewish mysticism as expressed through a certain branch of philosophy, like a certain philosophical branch, is this idea that so much of experiencing God in this world is sustained attention on the life force of all things, which is presence, noticing, recognizing the divine reality, even just when experiencing nature, to experience more of a sustained attention on nature and to recognize that this is pulsing with the life force, that it isn't a random fluke of nature, but that it's interconnected with all of existence. Moments like that affirm God's reality in this world and put us in a state of more divine consciousness or life force consciousness, where we really just see the web of life that pulses through all things equally.
Yeah, wow. You just said that so well.
Tell me the purpose of life.
I was like, you just said that so well. And also, like, my brain is downloading all that information that you spoke. Like, there was so many layers in that just we went through. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So, two parts. If we're talking about the purpose and lighting up and the reality of God, and I love how you split that into three. And back to Avraham, which is as our father, as the father of our nation and the biggest example, right? It seems like he understood that in order to recognize God in this world and for other people to recognize God in this world, it wasn't only about lighting himself up, which he did, it was also about the service of it, right? Like he waited for people to come and serve them food and then bless God and explained and all of that. And so it feels like it's really attached to service, where purpose is some sort of service that you're giving into the world. And through that, people are realizing the godliness of the world and how God is attached and how God is in this world. And so the issue I have with that, even though it's a fact and it's a truth, is that sometimes it takes people away from themselves, right? Like now, instead of I am who I am, now I am this person. Now I am a podcaster. Now I'm a teacher. Now I am. And so the people who aren't one of those things or doing one of those things, they may feel that them just doing nothing, they don't have a purpose. And I don't know if that's true. So what would you speak on that? If someone who's, I can't be all these things because I'm just living life, I'm trying to survive, I'm feeding my family, I'm working, where are they finding their purpose? Or is it what you said earlier about them just getting into presence, just noticing Hashem? Maybe their job is to notice Hashem in this time, in the details.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I love how you highlighted that point about service. I do think that there is a core, like there is, with every gift comes a responsibility. And the Jewish people were endowed with this enormous ability and gift, and also made a covenant with God to show up in service to the world, to be a light unto the nations, to be, if I'm a piece of God, then my role in this world is to reflect God in this world. And we do that through the teachings of Torah and mitzvos and noticing God in this world and educating the world about a force of oneness. I don't believe that our purpose is always external and outward. You mentioned that very often when people step into a role of service, then that sort of eclipses who they are as people. I genuinely, deeply believe that the most important part of our lives, the most important work of our lives, is definitely the internal one, and the people that are truly in our lives, meaning our family, our friends, the people in our communities. Because we live in an age where there is so much opportunity for public service that reaches beyond our physical space, we can mistaken any sense of purpose for being something that exists like out there in the world.
Right.
But we can show up even within our communities in slightly public ways that could be for the 5 women, men around us, which is public contribution, but isn't a role that we take on in the way that I think a public persona would be more. But back to the internal life, I think that so much of our service, work, reflecting and revealing God in this world happens. For me, I feel that a lot of my work happens with my children, with my family, in the private spaces of my life. I'm sharing the runoff in my, what people might consider, oh, that's your purpose or your
Right.
service. It's really the runoff of a private life with God, with people that I love, with my own experience and story of my own faith. And then it's the offering that comes from my life. But I think my life is the main part.
I love that you said that. I love that you said that because I think, especially in this world of everyone is living a public life because of social media, right? Not whoever is choosing to be on it on some form. And I love that you said that what you're doing is a runoff of your actual life and your purpose of your life, because we don't see so much of that. And I was saying this to someone else, it feels like sometimes the purpose becomes the new hustle, right? It's, oh, now I've figured out my purpose and I'm going to teach it to you and I'm going to figure out what that is. And I love the idea that the purpose is internally, it's discovering yourself, because no matter where you are in your life, in your healing, in your discovery of God and your relationship with God, I feel like the being in flow and being out of flow, being in flow and being out of flow, like you mentioned earlier, it doesn't end, right? Like it's a constant. And I think there's this idea like I'm going to discover godliness and I'm going to feel connected and then I'm fine. And when in the beginning of that discovery, it almost feels like when you go out of flow, you're like, what happened? Why am I here again? I've figured this out, right? And then what you said earlier is such a big key part of it. It's the noticing. It's even like walking in nature and just the noticing, the presence, the being present that I think brings you back to flow and God and the purpose of being human. And unless we're in that state of connection, it's really hard to be of service and to give. And I feel like all this learning that's going on, like I know you're teaching a Tonia class online, which I highly recommend people join because I know you're a fantastic teacher. It almost feels like that's the thing that brings you back if you can't get back on your own, is learning again and talking again. So are we back to this idea of purpose as just noticing God in the world? If we're going to go to the idea of presencing ourselves because we're out of flow, then are we going back to this idea of like just being present? And then if you keep falling out of it, do you stay in it? Do you stop giving for a minute? Is there any rhyme or reason, or is it just something everyone has to experience on their own?
First of all, I feel like there's so many things that you're touching on and
I
everything
know.
that you just
As
shared.
I'm talking to you, I'm like, I'm asking her 18 questions. Stop
But I love
asking.
it.
Let her talk.
No,
Okay.
I love it. I can hold all the threads. I love it. First of all, I love it.
I feel
think it's
like you
fun.
could because you thread.
No, but this is what's fun about a conversation.
Yes.
In real conversations, this is how real conversations work. You don't
Correct.
just ask one question and then get
And
one
then move
answer
on.
and then
No,
ask a question.
I'm very into conversation.
Yeah. So first of all, one thing that I would really want to highlight around like noticing presence, sustained attention
Yeah.
is that what differentiates this from just typical mindfulness is an awareness of God, presence with God, presence with my divine source. And for example, the chapter of Tanya that speaks about presence and sustained attention on the world to notice God and to really experience God's presence does not separate presence from the life force. And I think that's really the core distinction that I would make. And in general, when it comes to you speak of everything that you just described of falling in and out of flow and being in service and then needing to find more presence in your life to hear your voice and untangle where you're holding. We are human beings. Our lives are constantly in process. And you described that purpose is the new hustle and that maybe we live in a culture where we want answers and people will say, I figured something out and I'm going to show you how I figured it out. I haven't figured anything out. I don't believe that any human being really can. Obviously, some human beings have unique wisdom to share, and I love learning from people's individual wisdom. But I think really being honest about the fact that none of us have mastered life None of us have mastered the wisdom of Torah. The process of being a human being, many of us have recycled souls, have been here before, will come back here again. We're all just on a juncture of our path and process and are just constantly finding our way back to ourselves. The Ishbitzer Rebbe, who is it's a branch of Hasidic thought that speaks really beautifully about how the process of life is all about remembering and forgetting over and over again. And every time you forget and then you remember, you bring new fruits from your period of forgetting to the remembering, which makes the remembering deeper of who you are, of what God is, of what your purpose is. And I've experienced that over and over again. And obviously, it's uncomfortable to be in that period of forgetting, in that period of feeling disconnected. I don't believe that they're mutually exclusive. I don't believe that you have to, sometimes we do. Obviously, this is so individually based.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I don't believe necessarily that I've always needed to take a full pause. But it could just be creating a little bit more space in my life to be quiet, to be with myself without having to necessarily press full pause on everything I'm doing. So I'm going to figure it out, even though that might be my instinct sometimes. Let me hide until I have it figured out. But that's operating under the lie that I can only show up when I figured it all out. And also that I'm defined by the work that I do. And that if I don't do the work that I do as a perfect reflection of what's going on internally at all times, then it isn't worthwhile. And that's a form of perfectionism that really prevents us from reflecting our purpose into this world. Each of us are a conduit and a channel and a pipeline for a certain divine energy to come into this world. This is also a really core principle in Hasidic ideology, which is that every particular vessel reflects a particular facet of God's light in this world. And so really staying true to what your facet of divine light is in this world is so necessary, but also staying really tapped into the fact that we are each simply channeling a particular divine light of God in this world. So some of it is just opening ourselves up, surrendering a little bit, and being willing to not do it perfectly, to try new things, to be in a more open state. When I recognize that I'm showing up, but I'm also a channel for something beyond myself, I think that creates a lot more lightness in the way that we show up, because I'm responsible, but it's not a reflection of me. I recognize that I can detach myself a little bit from my output. And in general, as someone who loves creating all of the time, releasing your creative work and detaching yourself from it is so freeing and liberating and challenging, and something that I think, like, after a sustained amount of time focusing on my creative work, I could honestly say I look back at things that I felt so deeply connected to at a certain point, and I genuinely have no idea who made that, who created that, who said that. Seriously,
I
because
believe it.
life we change,
Right.
we evolve, and the instinct is I want to rip off, I want to destroy almost anything that doesn't reflect who I am today. But that channels a particular type of divine light and energy in the world that reflected where I was at a certain point and what God needed me to be a mouthpiece for in that moment. And hopefully it will still find the people that need that. And now I just have to faithfully continue to channel. That's why, by the way, I think that the evolution is less about changing who we are and like taking on a new identity, but it's just staying open to the flow of life that's coming through us. And Hashem is constantly sending different and new energy through us into the world. And I think that finding our purpose is really about opening ourselves up enough to be a channel for whatever divine light needs to come through us, getting out of our own way a little bit and not over identifying with how we are showing up. So obviously having courage and owning our unique point of view and owning our own perspective, assignment, task, job in this world without becoming overly attached to what that is, and allowing ourselves to be a flow and channel for something beyond ourselves. And that also allows me to recognize that when there are ebbs and flows in that way, it's because I'm operating with a partner, and my partner is the one who is flowing through me. And my job is just to stay open to what is able to come through me.
That is so beautiful. That was so beautiful and so powerful. I just want to sit with it. I want the listeners to sit with it. I loved all of it. And especially the part, and I think this is really important for people to hear, is that not to be a perfectionist with it and to show up messy, which is really hard. I never thought I was a perfectionist until I stopped showing up and started doing Artist Way and started reading books. I know you just read on your Purim podcast from the War of Art, which was so synchronistic because my last Artist Way group, it was their idea to do a little book club of the War of Art. They felt it was like
Amazing.
a good follow up, and I had
It's
never
so
heard
good.
of it. And I was like, sure, I'm in. And we've been doing it. And then you showed up with that chapter. And I feel like so much in that book, and anyone who's trying to do something or put something out or be creative, I highly recommend this book. I don't remember the author.
Stephen Pressfield.
Stephen, yes. And what I love about that book and what I love about you, what you said just now, is this idea of just like showing up kind of messy. And in one of the parts of the Artist Way, she talks about how your job is to bring the quantity and God brings the quality, right? Hashem brings the quality. And I love that because what happens is we get so caught up in, is it good enough? Is it strong enough? Will people like this? And when you're an open vessel and trying to stay an open vessel, I find that the ideas that flow through, like your idea on human and holy, imagine if you started being like, this podcast needs to look like a Mel Robbins podcast. And she's had so many more years of experience at that point in whatever it is you're doing. So this idea of like just being an open vessel and letting it flow through you and to keep moving forward. It sounds like the action is a big part of it.
Totally. I think that movement for me, it keeps me in that open state. And even as I'm thinking about how abstract it could seem, like we're all pipelines for divine end.
Right.
So I'm just noticing that because I don't want to like veer into that space where it just seems like really abstract ideas, but not tangible for us to touch on. I want
Yeah.
to talk about what that actually means for
Yeah,
me
please.
personally and what I think that we can tap into to experience that because the perfectionism movement, forward movement, is so much more revealing of
Mm,
our purpose than trying to figure it out. I think that obviously like the journaling, the time alone, all those things are helpful, but the thing that will teach you the most about yourself, about what you want to do, about what you have to offer is doing the thing and seeing if it hits, if it resonates with others, with you, if it's sustainable in your life, just making small moves. I really like the idea from Rick Rubin of do the smallest version of a project that is available to you. So we have an idea for something, and so then we want to do it on the grandest scale, but to
mhm.
do the smallest version of that idea and just try it and see what happens. Because very often doing the smallest version of a project is actually what leads us to doing the largest version of that
Right.
project. And it also, through doing that, it gives us the skills to get to doing the largest version of the project. And I think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was brilliant in this way because he sent young people into places all over the world, definitely did not have the skill set to build these Chabad centers, communities, to fundraise, to wear so many hats. But anyone who I've spoken to, and I grew up that way, and so much of my family runs Chabad centers and our shluchim, is that the work itself develops you. And that
Mm,
through going out, and so when a couple begins, they're not building a 4-story building and getting into all the major institutions in the city. They're hosting families for Shabbat dinner once a
right.
month and just trying to cover the expense for that. And then slowly they work their way into what exactly does this community need from me and what's the intersection between my abilities and my community's needs. And I think that model is very helpful for all of us because do the smallest version of your idea of what you have to contribute to the world. And the stakes are don't make the stakes so high. If you're investing so much money into something, then if it flops, it's terrifying. Do
Right.
something small, do the smallest version of project, idea, concept, whatever it is you want to bring into the world. I always think in terms of creating because I'm a creative
Yeah.
person. So I'm like, what do you want to create? But not everyone wants to create. Sometimes people want to do something else, meaning they want to embark on a process of study or discovery or contributing in a different way or a certain job or whatever it is, but do the smallest version of that and see if it actually hits the way you imagine it would. Because theorizing is just simply not as helpful to actually finding the path of your soul as really getting in there and doing it. And don't be afraid to, there's so much refining you could do over the years. Like you mentioned the
Right.
Mel Robbins podcast. So you want to have it on like the highest level of production, but the way that I think for most regular people to get to that level is to tweak slowly over the years. And then you eventually see that version. But there was a lot of refinement that got to it. And it was through the process that, meaning even for myself, like moving on certain levels of production for us, for Human and Holy. The
Right.
only reason why that was justified was because, okay, this feels like a small next step, a small next step, a small next step. And obviously, if someone has the ability to, by all means, like I actually think that executing things on a high level of excellence is amazing. I just think that for myself, that would really hold me back. And I see how the refinement often happens through the work. And you also figure out what's actually worth investing money in, what's
Right.
actually worth investing time in. And I don't know, I like taking those like small playful risks, like trying new things and then tweaking them until it feels right. And this is the finished product that I want. And you're
Yeah.
going to mess up in public. So
Right. And see how people react to it. You're like, you're going to mess up in public. Don't worry about it.
ha- that I feel like
It
that's part of
is.
the humbling process of doing anything in this world is knowing that's part of not over identifying with what you're
Right.
creating.
And I
It is
think
humbling.
that's really important is not over. First of all, that sentence you said that the work develops you is so
Mm-hmm.
good because it's so true across the board.
Yeah.
Creativity, whatever work you're doing, the work develops you. And so it's important. And by doing that action and by doing the work or being creative, we always say that we're like co-creators with Hashem, right? With
Mm-hmm.
God. And so God doesn't have the opportunity to co-create with you if you're not creating, if you're not moving forward, if you're not doing anything. But the second you take one step, Hashem's with you, and then the ideas flow, and you meet this person. There's synchronistic moments everywhere, and it's so cool. And I think the over identifying is big. Not over identifying with like how it has to look, and this is who I am, and this is what I look like, and this is who I speak to, and this is who I work for, and just really being open to that flow. And like now I'm second guessing my words.
The flow, I know.
I'm like, flow, being open to who's connecting with you, who's
Mm-hmm.
reaching out to you, whatever it is. But I love the smallest step. And I really think that's key because even if you have the ability for a big production, like for myself, I know that would stop me in about 3 seconds.
For sure.
That the like overall idea of something so grand. But I keep, what's my next step? What's one small step? How can I improve this on a tiny level? Whether
Right.
it's production or art or creativity or organizations or whatever it is you're doing. And so almost in a way, it feels like now I'm thinking about what you said that the work develops you. It almost is like the work creates your purpose for you as well.
Mm.
It's almost like everything that we interact with Hashem and this world, we all know the, like you explained earlier, the purpose for this world and for Hashem being in this world and finding those sparks and lighting yourself up and lighting others up. It's almost like if you can keep doing that on a slow level, your purpose will find you. Because if we know who we really are, right, we're all given different sets of talents. And if we use those talents in whatever form, because they're gifts from Hashem, then that kind of just leads to the next thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the way you said that because I think that we have maybe a fantasy of receiving this like
Download.
yeah, like an enormous download, which I know that some people do and is enormous. And I think that there may be certain junctures in our lives where we experience that. But for the most part, I think that it's really a slow unraveling of our
Yeah.
purpose. And it's something that we can really only see in hindsight. And wanting to wish that away is wishing away our humanity and is not true to the experience of life and is more about controlling our environments and our purpose than it is about uncovering them. Truly, I know I feel the instinct too, meaning
Yeah.
I think we all have that, but I just think that it just completely bypasses what our lives are really about, which is slowly unraveling who we are, why we are here, leaning into the trust that Hashem is guiding me as I'm making moves. And I do believe in the movement, as you said, in the creating, in being high agency in terms of how we are showing up and making moves. Like, I don't think that this is a passive process. Whereas, by the way, waiting for like to journal away until something lands in my lap, I do think is can prevent us from finding the work or the creativity or whatever it is that, or the relationships or the place that we
Mm-hmm.
want to live or the jobs or whatever it is that we are seeking. And being in that state of movement and making moves, I think really invites Hashem to match us into Tehillim. We say God is our shadow. And there's a beautiful interpretation of that, that God follows and reflects where we move. And he shadows us in larger and more expansive ways. But we're the ones who have to move forward and we're the ones who have to make moves. And I really believe in that. And I think that it's very different to me from hustling to prove your worth. It's about being in a state of creativity and agency, owning my life, not being in a state of victimhood, recognizing that anything that I crave, I need to create for myself and trust that Hashem is going to expand whatever it is that I create in ways that are so much larger than I could imagine, but also believing that it starts with me and it ends
Mm.
with God. Like I have to make those moves and God is going to reflect me, shadow me, expand me in ways that are so much larger than what I could imagine. And I think that's really the message of co-creation with God is being in a state of high agency. And we really see those models throughout Torah and Judaism, which is the moves that invited miracles. And obviously, there's the famous one that I really love of Nachshon ben Aminadab stepping into the sea. And it was only
Amazing.
when he was fully in the water that the sea split. And so that's a level of high agency and determination. And I'm just walking into the water. And then the greatest miracle occurred. And even if you feel cynical about miracles happening in your life, even if you feel cynical about that level of divine intervention, I think we all could recognize that even just on a very basic level, we can't imagine the impact of our forward movement. Even if it's small ways, it all creates ripple effects and shifts in our lives. If you create a 5-minute habit in your life that's different and moving you towards a vision of a person that you want to be or imagine you could be, it could open up a lot more for you than you imagine based on the amount of effort that you're putting into it.
I love that. I was just going to ask you for an example, and you just gave it. Spending five
Perfect.
minutes in a different, I think that what you said is so powerful for anyone who is in a space of stuckness or not in flow or not having clarity. I think that 5 minutes, I started doing that. I don't remember where I heard this or read this, but it was make decisions now for the person
Mm-hmm.
you want to be in the
Mm-hmm.
future. And so, if you can, obviously. And a lot of the decisions I've been making lately is like what I envision myself in 6 months, in a year, and 5 years
Mm-hmm.
from now. What decision would that person make with what's in front of me? And it changes my decision
Yeah, that's
and
good.
it changes what I do. And it's wild. And it's something so simple, right? Because it's a decision now and it's based on whatever is going on in my life. But what you said, it's just that 5 minutes of change. You just don't know that ripple effect and where it can lead you.
I love that principle, Aura. And I love that idea, by the way, even if it's just what I envision myself as being calmer than I am. Like, what would the calm version of
Yes.
me do?
Thank
Or
you
what
for
would the,
explaining what would the calmer version, what would the more loving version be? What would the more compassionate version? Like if I'm dealing with my kids and I'm overwhelmed and I'm in a moment and I'm have enough space in my head to like pause for a second, which isn't always, I'll be
right.
honest. But in that moment, it's I could be more compassionate. If I was more, my future self is more compassionate because I'm calmer, because I have more time, because I don't have babies at
Mm-hmm.
home or whatever it is, what would that compassionate person, what would that reaction be?
Yeah,
And then it moves you and it changes you.
totally. Another thing, too, by the way, is even
Yeah.
just the what will my experience be after I do this thing? I think that's a principle that I really understand through Chassidus of the difference between the animal and divine soul, and the animal being a much more impulsive state of being, and the divine soul being a more
Can you go
deeper.
into that a little bit more for anyone who doesn't have a background in Hasidus? Just give a little bit about animal and divine.
For sure. This is a principle that shows up throughout Kabbalistic thought and is really fleshed out, obviously, through Chassidus, but this idea and given different names in different places. But within Chabad Chassidus, it's really framed as the animal or human soul and the divine soul, and basically understanding that there's different levels of consciousness within a person. And one is the level of consciousness, which is survival based, really operating under the belief that I'm not tapped into a source, that I'm responsible for my own survival. And it's a really necessary part of who we are. And it's actually what moves us forward. And there's a part of myself, which is a deeper layer of who I am, meaning they're not split consciousness in the way that we would imagine it, but it's actually a deeper level of consciousness, which is the holy divine self, which is surrounded by the human consciousness. And they interact with each other and speak through each other. So, meaning the divine soul speaks through the animal consciousness, which just simply means that the divine being and the deeper divine self can only speak through the human being, which
Right.
the soul is in a body. And that's how the soul communicates itself through the world. Obviously, every mitzvah, every good deed that is defined and expressed through the Torah happens through the body. And that's considered the divine soul's expression in the world happens through studying Torah and doing mitzvot and doing things that affirm God's reality in this world. All of that happens through the body and through the human self. So we see how they're very much interconnected. We can't have one without the other. When we are operating in a way that is split, the very definition of klipa, which is something that obscures its life force, is peel and covering, and it's something that covers up its life force, and it's something that sees itself as being disjointed from its source, from God. Kedusha is something that sees its life force, Kedusha meaning holiness. So many of the mitzvot that we do are about affirming God's reality in this world or abstaining from further obscuring his reality in this world. So the animal consciousness is the part of a self, and there's obviously so much more that could go into, but I think this one nugget can really help us when it comes to making decisions is the animal consciousness is a more impulsive part of the self that operates in a loop-like way where there's no openness to a life force beyond myself and my own life. And so it often is like those recurring patterns and habits and experiences. Divine soul consciousness is rooted in openness to God and something beyond my life and an opportunity for transcendence. And so those are decisions that we're making that open up a little bit of spaciousness to the reality of God in this world, possibility of God in this world, possibility that maybe there's a life force beyond myself. And so one of the ways that I think that this really practically shows up for people and for me is the long-term impact of this action and really having far-reaching vision. In Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, it's one of the lines is, who is a wise person? Someone who sees what has not yet been born. And the divine soul's experience is very much being able to have vision and see the long-term impact, to see beyond where I currently am, not having tunnel vision in my life. And very often that's a pointer that I come back to in my own choices, which is, how am I going to feel after this? How am I going to feel in a week if I show up this way or that way? And that often helps me refine what I actually want versus how I'm currently feeling. And by the way, it's not linear. It doesn't mean,
Right.
if I think long-term, then it's always going to mean like doing the thing. Sometimes it means actually not doing the thing, because in the context of my life, this isn't that significant and it's going to deplete me and take me away from my family. And so I want to be conserving my energy in this moment. I could see how this may lead to burnout versus actually I could see how this wouldn't take away so much from my environment. And this will be something that I'll look back at and not regret doing. Obviously, we can't completely prophesize the impact of our actions, but I think that is helpful. And especially when it comes to showing up in a loving, compassionate, calm way. Sometimes in a challenging moment with a child, I'll imagine myself sitting on the couch after they're sleeping and just it's calm and I'm filled with love for them and it's peaceful. And how will I have wanted bedtime to go? And that takes me out of that immediate impulsive loop of I'm just right here and I have this tunnel vision of this moment and I need to get them to bed, to a more loving, expansive state that I will be in later when I'm calmer and more regulated. And I can see what's going to be in the future a little bit. And that helps me make the choice right now.
That's awesome. That is a great nugget. I love that. The last thing I want to talk about is vision. So you talk about how the divine soul is really expansive and open and has really great vision. And so I heard the saying that what you desire, what you imagine for yourself is Hashem's way of telling you what's available to you. And obviously that's for the good. Negative desires you can figure out with your animal soul on your own time. But for the most part, for people who are have this vision of who they could be, who they want to be, is that something you've heard of or you believe in? Do you agree with? Does Hasidus agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty general statement. I think what you're referring to is like whatever you desire desires you type of thing.
Yeah.
And I definitely, meaning it's an oversimplification of something that I think is very real and true and deep in our lives, which is that there the so much of our divine soul or our most realized selves is underdeveloped potential internally. And you do have to take a bet on yourself and have vision for what's possible. And I think that a lot of that becomes simpler to execute on when you trust that you are a divine being and that there's so
Yeah.
much more inside of you than what you know. So that instinct is not self-aggrandizement, but is actually an instinct of how great your divine soul is and how much you could contribute to the world. I think that a big element that I believe in around this is also orienting ourselves to a life of service, because maybe like the slight nuance of that statement that sometimes I wonder about is where so much of these spiritual principles are about securing the best, most expansive life for myself, which I believe in. I believe everyone should have the best and most expansive, gorgeous lives. And also, I think that the way that the Torah looks at it is expansion and also commandedness and covenant and responsibility. And I think that the mistake that we sometimes make is that the covenant will take away from my own expansion. But I really believe that when those two things come together, we get the greatest expansion and the greatest sense of purpose. And also, we're really serving the world. And so, I would really say that when we can orient ourselves towards giving over what we have, who we are to Hashem, to God, and to our life force, and really aligning ourselves with that, we can also really trust that our expansion is actually going to be utilized for that higher purpose. So if anyone is in that state where they're in a state of service or wanting to give to the world, then any expansion within them is going to be a gift to the world. If someone is in a state of service where they're generous in how they give to the world, that could be financially, that could be emotionally, that could be with their talents, whatever it is. Any expansion God gives them, if God expands them creatively, if God expands them in the projects they could do, that's a service to the world. And people who like, the more money they make, the more money they give. And so I think that orienting ourselves, recognizing that this is a gift from God for me to be a steward of that energy into the world, I think really opens us up. And then I would 100% say, whatever I desire desires me, because I am desiring to give to the world. And that's the deepest level of receiving from God, is I want to receive everything so I can give it all back to the world, so I could contribute, so I could show up. And obviously it's not so linear where I have this money, so I give this money. Sometimes it's I have a healthy relationship, so I'm more stable and steady within myself, so I can show up in a more expansive, healthy way. Obviously, I'm not giving my relationship to the world, but I think that being in that posture of service and recognizing that I'm not on this earth just to serve myself and my own desires, and all of my desires are in service of a mission and a purpose, and I'm here to make a difference. And so, yes, what I desire is an opportunity to give something great to the world. And the more I can imagine what's possible in my own life, I can also extend that to what's possible and how I contribute that to the world.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I also love the way you said that of the way it expands you. For example, like just something simple like relationship, like desiring
Mm.
having the most incredible relationship with your partner or your children or your parents. When you're in that relationship, you are so lit up
Mhm.
from love and joy and everything that it's giving you. You're able to be in service to the world in such a high standard than you would if those things were a negative experience.
Yeah.
So the desires of having something very fulfilling and full does bring you into service for expanding to the world. And I also love that you are talking about the receiving and giving in the same circle, because I really do believe my last series was called Divine Wealth, and we really talked about where
Mm.
money and bitachon and Hashem meet.
Mm.
And one of the strongest points that came through was this understanding this circle of receiving and giving and how it's fully connected. And that sometimes in order to give, you really need to learn how to receive and strong on a strong level. And I think that's
100%.
part of service is once it's easy for me to receive. And once you receive, it's easy for me to give. Because if you're receiving, then your cup is full and then you can give more easily.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we don't necessarily have that direct instinct or through line of thought where we think, I want this relationship so I could be more steady. But
Yes.
we're like, I really want a stable, healthy, expansive relationship. And then I'm in that more expansive state, and suddenly more opens up to me. I'm like, oh, I trust myself more. I have more to give. Or I think for a lot of women, it shows up with, oh, I really could use more support in my family unit with my kids or with cleaning or whatever it is, just because I'm depleted and I want more calm. And then from that calm, from that openness springs forth new ways that I could not just tangibly contribute, but just give a different energy into the world that is also really uplifting. I think that something that a contribution that we often miss, that we don't think about, and that we don't necessarily think so consciously about giving, is being an example of a certain type of person. And I know that I'm most impacted by people who embody a way of being that I find deeply inspiring, and they're not necessarily peddling it in any conscious way, but something about who they are and the way that they show up and engage with their life and the people around them and their own energy and sense of self just changes me. And they might not even know how I relate to them in that way. But there's also just that element of being a certain type of person in this world and how that shifts the world around you.
1000%. I have absolutely experienced that. And I know many people do. And if you're going back to purpose, then that person just being themselves was their purpose in that moment. If they're lighting you up to be more joyful and expansive and in relationship with God and learning and all of that stuff, it's those role models are just incredible. And it's so fun to find them and to bring them into your life. And I'm sure you're one of them for many people.
I think that that's actually the influence, like the impact that so many people are seeking. I know for myself,
Yeah.
there's really a move away from positions more into, I think we're just living in a time where people really appreciate internalized pneumius. Like as we
Yeah.
move towards the time of redemption, when godliness is going to be revealed, we move towards a time where the cultural value is one of pneumius, of one of internalized truth and identity. And I think that I know for myself, like I really deeply appreciate that in people when I feel, meaning you don't have to be, I say this all the time, like you don't have to be a Rebbitzin to teach Torah. You don't
Right.
have to be a Rebbitzin to be alive with Torah and to impact so many people to study. We think of that as like you have to take on a certain role or be a certain person. But
Totally.
if you can really genuinely share love for things that are godly, you can have such an impact on other people. And I know that has a great impact on me. And that's what I think a lot of us are seeking, is just real people who are embodying principles, traits, values that we want to inculcate in our own lives.
1000%. Tanya, this was so good.
So fun.
I'm like, I know I can go for hours with you, but we
So
do have
much
a time
fun.
limit. You just brought so much value to this hour and to this podcast. And I know that a lot of people are searching for this specific idea right now about what is my purpose and who am I and what do I have to give. And there's just so much here. And I'm so grateful for you showing up and being your awesome self. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And I'm excited to see how your series unfolds. It's a great
Me
project.
too.
Me
Me
too.
too. Can't wait to see it. Talk about development through movement. We're
Yes,
going to see how this series unfolds.
so beautiful.
Thanks to Tanya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.